everybody. This is Meister Keen, and today we are looking at yet another constitution. Oh, no. Oh, no. We got another one, guys. So this is another super group. But I'll tell you, I looked at this thing. Somebody linked this into a Discord that I had access to. Terrible mistake. Don't ever do that. Don't ever give me links into your Google Docs, because I'll make a video. I will. So here we go. And this is actually, this one ain't that bad. Yeah, I started going, oh no, it's another one. I'm going to have to review it. By the end of it, I was going, okay. So let's go over it. It's called Lodestar. Now, this is a constitution. And it already has a pretty impressive list of members. And it has at least attempted to actually quantify how many members of what sorts. And I don't think that these estimates are probably. I'm gonna say that these estimates are a little bit rosy. I don't think you're actually going to see quite this many people from these groups, but it's all right. It's a quantification of sorts, and you'd better at least try to quantify, and get some idea of what these groups are actually going to bring to the table. So that's fine. Good. Also, well, we got to give them massive style points. One thing that's good about it is that it's called Lodestar. Lodestar. It's not an acronym. You know how many three-letter acronyms we got? We got the UDI, we got the GSC, we've got, ALR, TCC, all these TLAs, three-letter acronyms. I hate TLAs. You're a hypocrite. I'm not a hypocrite. Anyway, and we've got, of course, each member group's got its symbol up front and center, and this looks good. It's good looking. I like it. So, points for style. Style doesn't matter that much in the end, but, well, it counts for something. And so they got that. They got style. Let's see. Whole table of contents. Definitions. Essential explanation. Definitions. All right. So we got definitions here. We got prime directives next to it. Now, the fact that they pluralized prime directives, somebody doesn't know what prime means. So, so a directive is a rule or a law or a principle or, it's a directive. A prime directive prime means first in importance or first in order, or it could mean the original or founding item or something, So the prime directive would be the first directive. It would be the most important directive. You can't really have more than one prime directive. So they use the word prime directive to mean a law or something that is passed upon by the Council of Archons. And they call them Archons. So Archons are the highest level decision makers in Lodestar. The Archons are representatives of the largest Lodestar faction. Oh, so it's not all factions that get Archons. It's the largest Lodestar factions. They're responsible for the decision making in the Union. It is their duty to guide Lodestar at large. Each faction can only have one Archon who is required to act professionally. I can't find. At least as many members as the average population across Archon factions, unless an 80% majority vote is made to override this by Archons. Okay, so we already got like a supermajority kind of thing here. I don't necessarily like supermajorities, but it can make sense in a sense. So, but they want to have very tight control over who gets to be part of the party. The Archons obviously are the guys that got the most control, and they only want to be able to very tightly control who is part of the Council of Archons, right? If you're going to be in the Council of Elrond, you better have Elrond's approval. Otherwise, you're not getting into Rivendell. Okay, anyway. Sentinels are the representatives of the Lodestar factions who do not carry the same weight of responsibility and decision-making as Archons. Each faction is one Sentinel. Sentinels should actively converse with each other, etc., right? Good. Be social and all that. Both Archons and Sentinels have to use the Lodestar tag. So this Unicode character right here is your Lodestar tag. Somewhere in their names and forums and in-game if possible. Alternatively, the alphanumeric version, Lodestar, LDSTR. Yeah, come on, a 5-letter tag, guys. Whatever. All right, fine. Really, a 5-letter tag? So you were cool enough to come up with a single word title for your group. But you had to come up with that tag? Oh, you can do better than that. You can do better than that. What about, what asterisk L asterisk or something? I don't know. That's not even that bad. You can do better. All right? Specialists. So now this is interesting. So specialists are advisors. They'll have ranks and so forth, and these are the ranks of specialists. And so they're ranking specialists according to their skill, and then they're creating a council of these specialists. Good idea, right? You bring in people who are skilled at whatever they do. They're good at what they do, and you give those people a voice and a platform, and you include them in your decision making. Fine. So somebody who is proven to be skilled in an area, they get your attention. Fine. However, if they're not actual decision makers, then they don't really need to be defined. They don't really need to be part of your constitution. The Constitution should be defining the actual framework of the decision making and the actual form and function of the government itself, right? And again, yes, I say government. It's a game government. I don't like game governments, but this one is simple enough and direct enough, and it is tuned well enough to the realities of video gaming that I think it might actually work. Any action, whether it is logistical, political, judicial, executive, etc., must be voted upon by the Archons and receive a majority vote for it to be carried out. If an Archon has not been able to submit a vote in the span of 3 days, the Sentinel from their faction may vote for them. Okay, so Sentinels can act as Archons in the absence of an Archon. Etc., etc. Case of a stalemate, vote is open to the Sentinel Council. So now you've got 2 levels of decision making. You've got the Archon Council and the Sentinel Council. Fine. So if the Archon Council can't decide upon a thing, they send it down to the Sentinel Council, and the Sentinel Council decides on it. Fine. I guess that works. If neither the Archon nor the Sentinel votes for decisions, they abstain from the vote and won't count towards the total pool of voters, etc. Fine. So you can abstain. Unity. Archons and Sentinels will foster good faith in relations with each other. No Lodestar faction may take action that results in harm to another Lodestar faction. Fine. Now, this is kind of interesting. So, yes, all Lodestar factions have a non-aggression pact with each other. NAP 7. NAP 7? I don't know what that is exactly. And a defense pact between each other. Right. So, should a faction announce their leave from Lodestar, each agreement will be disbanded according to... Okay, fine. Whatever. Non-Lodestar factions on friendly terms. Provided the option to join Lodestar to avoid conflict brought on by an activated offensive or defensive war. Fine. Okay. So, that's interesting. So, in other words, be inclusive of factions that might otherwise be neutral in a fight. You know, if you've got one of your groups is kind of buddy-buddy with a group that's not a Lodestar faction, you can say, okay, guys, for the purpose of this combat here, this theater of war, you guys are considered a Lodestar faction, and we won't attack you. Good policy. I like it. You know, and there's some inclusivity to that. That's cool. Prime directives. God, you gotta call it prime. All members at all levels shall respect and adhere to the Prime Directives and Constitution of Lodestar. Prime Directives are the laws of Lodestar and can only be passed with a 60% majority Archon vote. Again, the supermajority. Yeah, alright, that makes sense. Fine, 60% majority. Votes that will affect the Constitution or the creation or removal of Prime Directives cannot be open to Sentinels. Okay. Probably a good idea. Alright, keep that to Archons. The Prime Directives of Lodestar are the most important laws factions are required to follow, and no forms of circumnavigation around them shall stand. All other agreements are secondary to the Constitution, Prime Directives. Any actions by Lodestar factions does not reflect the laws of Constitution. Right, increasing sanctions. Sanctions and expulsion from Lodestar. Good. So, you have laws. And there are penalties, actual penalties, for violating those laws. And you got a defense pact, so if somebody is under attack, you are actually required to show up and help out if you're a Lodestar faction. So if you're not doing that, it's right there in the Constitution. You can even argue that a faction that fails to assist another faction according to their defense pact has violated the Constitution of Lodestar and could be sanctioned for it. Great, right? Pay up a fine to the group that you failed to help, or your status as a Lodestar group will be reviewed by the Archon Council. All right, good. So there's some threat there. Warfare, offensive, defensive war, of course. You can go to war offensively, defensively. Lodestar factions may still wage their own wars, and they will not be interfered with by Lodestar unless the Lodestar faction was the one who had war declared on them. So this is the defensive pact, right? Only with the formal permission from the initial attacking Lodestar faction may another one join the war and assist them. Right. Good. So if you're a Lodestar faction and you go into a war of aggression with another group, Lodestar will actually stand by and let you do that. So they actually take a neutral stance to that kind of action. That might be a dangerous thing to do. You might want to ask that your member groups don't start wars that they can't finish. Just a matter of prudence. I would argue that Lodestar might want to be able to have just a little bit of a hook in there to maybe make some decisions on this, and maybe say, hey, don't do that. I don't know. But fine. Okay. That's if that's the way you want to play it, that's fine. At least it's written down that Lodestar is not necessarily involved in their members' wars. Good. Good to have that defined somewhere. Rules of war. Finders, keepers. First Lodestar faction to capture an object gets to keep it. Fine. No eating from someone else's plate. Don't capture other people's shit, basically. Joint operations by roughly equal forces results in all the participating Lodestar factions having a claim. Lion's share. If you're the biggest faction involved in the operation, obviously you get the biggest share. Uninvited guests. Okay, fine. So basically what this boils down to is salvage rights. Salvage rights. After the battle, who gets to salvage what and how much? Good. That's cool. And at least, something that this does that I like, right? One of the questions you want to ask in going into a supergroup is, what do we get out of this, right? We join this supergroup, but do we actually get anything back from this, right? That was, you remember the old Senate, right? That stupid thing, right? The proposed ideas there involved absolutely no responsibility on the part of the member groups, and nothing except just sort of a loose agreement of, okay, we're a group now, and no mention at all of what you actually get out of it. You might be required to provide, like 25% of your manpower to a war, but then absolutely no word at all of what you could possibly get out of it, right? So if there's territory or stuff or anything else, resources to be gained from a war, well, okay, so what these guys are saying is that the degree of participation in that joint operation determines how much of the spoils of that operation you get to take home. Great. This is good. It's good. I would expand this a little further into more than just salvage rights. I would say that the gains from war is like you could maybe make it a little bit more of a talking point. Whatever gains may be gained from a joint operation can be, something along those lines. But this is good. This is a good starting point. It's a good idea. I haven't seen this anywhere else. Good. Joining or leaving Lodestar. Any Lodestar faction is free to leave whenever they want to. Okay, that's fine. But is there any kind of a penalty for leaving, right? You're there, you're providing your support, and then suddenly you withdraw because maybe there's a decision that's made that you don't like. Should there or should there not be some sort of a penalty for that? Maybe there should. I don't know. But they say that Lodestar factions are just free to leave, so, all right. I don't know. Think about that one, because that one, you might want to approach that one again. Autonomy. Now this is good. They're approaching something here that is actually important in lawmaking, and I'm going to go over this. The sections before this cover all the responsibilities of Lodestar factions. Each Lodestar faction has the complete freedom to govern their organization and space as they see fit, while still following the Constitution and Prime directives. No motion shall be set in place that will harm or dramatically change how a Lodestar faction operates. Should a motion be brought forth that does violate this, the Lodestar faction may refer to this section, upon which the Archons will resolve the issue. In other words, if they were to pass a law that dramatically changes the way that your group operates and would infringe upon your actual, your group's actual operation in a way that clashes too badly with the new Lodestar law, you can actually bring this up. Hey, under the Autonomy clause, my group has got the right to behave the way it wants to behave. Right? Look, the Autonomy clause, right there, it says it. My group is autonomous. You don't get to determine how my group operates and how my people behave. Right? Maybe just within certain limits, and maybe actually you should define what are the powers, because we don't actually have that here. We don't really have a list here of what are the powers of Lodestar versus what Lodestar cannot legislate. Right? You're taking maybe it's a relatively hands-off approach to the groups under Lodestar. Good idea. And that's probably a safe way to not create conflicts with the other groups. However, if you're too hands-off, then your groups could start misbehaving in ways that can really reflect badly on Lodestar and affect the other groups. So, what you may want to do is to figure out a way to, you might want to somehow define certain reasonable limits of behavior of the members of these other groups, right? And it can be real basic. It can be real basic. Don't cheat. Don't break the game. Don't, things that, no sane, reasonable members would disagree with. It's like real basic. Real basic. No third-party programs to cheat, You can do that. It's all right. It's all right. You can set certain limits of behavior, right? And then you can legislate those, and you can say that those are within the laws, they're within the boundaries of Lodestar law. You could do that. I think you would be okay doing that. All right. So as you can tell, I have some kvetches with this. Archons, Sentinels, Prime Directive. You guys are using fancy language you don't need to use. Archons and Sentinels, those are really cool words. Those are really cool words. You don't need cool words. You can use simple words. Maybe one of the things you're kind of trying to do is avoid using the word senator or representative. And I can kind of see that, just to distinguish yourself. This is a game government, and we know we're playing a game, right? So that, I guess that could make some sense. So I would have a word with you on that. What is your reasoning for using these words, right? And do these words really make sense in the sense that you're using them? Do you really know what these words mean? That's a good question, because it's obvious you don't know what Prime Directive means. I'm going to fuck with you guys a little bit, actually, on this, and I'm going to give you some secrets to lawmaking that nobody knows. Nobody's doing this right. But I'm going to teach you guys some stuff. All right, here we go. So, a law or a rule or a definition has got to have 5 principal parts. It has to have a description. In other words, what is it? Number 2, it has got to have differentiations. What isn't it? Right? What is it not? Number 3. All right. You get description, differentiations. You got to have purpose. What's it for? That's important. Why does the law exist in the first place? Number 4. The law must have application. How do you use it? And number 5, limitations. When not to use it. Right? These are the principal and These are the most important components of any law or rule or definition or anything. If you were defining a thing, if you cover these 5 points, you've covered it. You've done it. The reason why is because people can be spurgy little animals who will completely fuck with your perfect little system and make it terrible. Will make it awful. They will completely wreck it by misinterpreting it intentionally and maliciously. People will do that. If you leave any talking points, if you leave any wiggle room, if you do not fully define things by these 5 points, somebody's going to come in there and they are going to maliciously and intentionally misunderstand it or misrepresent it to its detriment and to their own personal, toward their own personal goals and gains. Right? You're going to have that. It's going to happen. I predict it. I predict that it will happen. I predict it's probably already happening with Lodestar. Don't let it happen. Make sure that in your lawmaking you cover these 5 points. Let's give an example. In fact, let's give the best example in the world, the Star Trek Prime Directive. That's right. You used the word Prime Directive. Now I get to nerd out about it and tell you how badly fucking wrong you are. The Prime Directive of Starfleet was, do not ever interfere in pre-warp societies. That was it. That was it. That was the rule. They didn't particularly tell you why that was the rule, or why it was the prime directive of the entire motherfucking Federation. I thought the Federation had more higher purposes than just not messing with pre-warp societies. But I guess that was that's it. That was the prime directive, the highest goal and purpose of the Federation. Don't fuck with pre-warp societies. So that's a description, at least. But it doesn't tell you what it isn't, what this rule isn't about, right? What are the list of things that doesn't really make sense to, what about semi-sentient entities like the crystal entity that would go around and vacuum up entire civilizations? You don't know if that thing was intelligent or not, but it could move at warp speeds, Did the Prime Directive apply to that? What about other possible, sentient entities that could travel at warp speeds, or maybe they couldn't travel at warp speeds? What about a civilization that had incredibly advanced, scientific tech that was well beyond warp drives? What if they developed a super warp drive, a wormhole drive before anybody ever came up with a warp drive? Man, so, just because they can move at light speeds in a different way than warps, than by going at warp speed, they're not part of the warp club? Or, it's like, right? No differentiation was made in that law. The purpose of the law, maybe they taught the purpose of it, or maybe they theorized on the purpose of that law in, the Starfleet Academy, but they sure didn't really consistently tell you what the hell the law was for in the first place. I don't know, something, mumble, natural, Darwinian, natural selection, I don't know, something like that. Civilizations that can't make it up to the level of warp drive don't deserve to be, whatever, I don't know. They didn't tell you. So you can assume it has no purpose, right? And keep in mind, by the way, that in every single episode of that stupid show, every fucking episode that had the Prime Directive mentioned in it, they had some sort of moral ambiguity about it, and then they went ahead and they violated it. And they did it I think they did it 20 times in TNG, right? So what the hell is that about? Right? If the law is constantly being violated because there's a higher purpose than the law serves, maybe saving a whole bunch of innocent people from complete disaster that's about to wipe out their entire civilization for no fault of their own, don't you have a heart? Come on. Of course, you'd get in there and you would help those people out. Wouldn't you? Of course. You're not the higher purpose of just charity and being good and decent people. Maybe that actually trumps whatever other purpose you think you have for your prime motherfucking directive. So, maybe the Prime Directive had a really, really good, well thought out, solid reasoning behind it, but it wasn't in the law. So, of course, number 3 becomes very important. Number 4, application of the law. How do you invoke and use the Prime Directive? What can you do with the Prime Directive? If your captain of your ship is violating the Prime Directive, is that grounds to remove him from his captaincy? That isn't defined in the law. It should be. It should be. It should be right there, right? Captains found to be violating the Prime Directive despite warnings from his executive officer can be replaced, right? Or something like that, right? He can be relieved of command, right? That should be right there in the rule. It should be written right there under it. And then next, of course, limitations. When do you not apply the Prime Directive? Under what conditions? Pray tell, under what circumstances can the Prime Directive definitively not be applied? What if it's a case where the civilization in question, there's no reason at all why it's not, they're about to be wiped out by some natural force for no fault of their own, right? Well, in that case, what purpose does it serve to let them meet their end? What if they're being invaded by a warp civilization? What if the Cardassians are in there enslaving a bunch of pre-warp people? Do you step in and stop that? Of course. Well, that's whoops. That's meddling. That's meddling. That's the Prime Directive. You're not allowed to do that. Yeah, but there's already interference going on from a warp society. You get that? All right, good. So that was the nerdiest damn thing to possibly talk about under this framework, but I think it demonstrates the point. If you make a rule or you define a thing in a way that does not include these 5 points, you leave it open for interpretation, and you create a circumstance in which that rule can be violated, perhaps with no consequences to the violator, right? You've created it can be just a sort of an illogic. You've created a sort of an arbitrary that doesn't go anywhere and doesn't actually help anybody. Right? But a law that does include these points, at least you can think with that law and you can apply it logically. If you had a good idea of the actual purpose of the Prime Directive, just with that in mind, you could think with when it would be appropriate to violate the Prime Directive, right? That would make sense. All right. If the purpose was to preserve life, then you could say, well, it doesn't preserve life to just let them die, so why don't we get in there and help out? And then you could successfully argue in court or a military tribunal. Well, right there in the purpose of the law is written, etc., 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 and my actions served that purpose. Therefore, my actions were actually in service to the Prime Directive. Aha! Now you've got a legal defense for your actions, which on the surface seem to violate that law. There you go, right? So that means actually what you can do is you can define all of the points that you see. You get legal precedent. You get laws passed on the basis of court decisions and things like that. And these court decisions establish legal precedent that and of course what anybody's trying to do is they're trying to serve justice, and do sensible things that are going to help people, and B, they're trying to serve the spirit of the law as best they can, or they're trying to justify some screwy thing that they did. Well, if you define a law well enough along these 5 points, then you remove a lot of the potential for future interpretation to twist that law into something that it wasn't meant to be. So you have to have these points in there, or you've got to have some permutation of these points. You don't have to list it all, 1 through 5. You don't have to be robotic about it, but you got to get some version of these things in there so that the intention that you had at the outset can't be corrupted. That's very, very, very important in lawmaking. All right. And by the way, and you'll notice that these things are not actually being done by modern governments at this time. It's because that they are terrible at lawmaking. Yes, that's right. Actual real-world governments are generally completely fucking awful at lawmaking. They are bad at it because they don't do these things. And generally, they pass those laws for reasons. They don't really want to talk about the purpose of that law or the purpose of whatever clause of whatever law, because the purpose is self-serving. So discussing that purpose or discussing the application of that law, maybe they've got a different application in mind for that law. And so they only describe what the law the letter of the law itself, but they don't talk about how it's to be applied so that they can apply it in some other underhanded way that nobody can see coming, right? You see, if you don't include these things, you also open the door for sort of legal, legislative subterfuge. You don't want that either. You don't want bad actors on the side of the legislature being allowed to do weird, screwy things with your lawmaking, and you don't want bad actors on the other end of the law being able to twist their way out of the law by being able to say that, they didn't violate the letter of the law when they absolutely violated its purpose and its spirit, right? This way, you at least get, you get a really good description of the spirit of that law in there with the letter of it. All right, here we go. Let's go back over here. Good. So, prime directive. If you're going to have a prime directive, make it one prime directive. And that prime directive should define the goal, the purpose, and the ideals, probably, of Lodestar. It should actually define what Lodestar is. And I would define Lodestar. You've actually got it. Like down here, right? Whoop. Autonomy. This defines the limitations of Lodestar with respect to its member groups, right? So that's point number 5 of lawmaking. They got that down. It's good. Excellent. Well done. Right? So they've got good enough thinkers over there that they're sort of automatically doing some of this. That's good. But I would put that front and center right up here, right? What is Lodestar? What is the purpose of Lodestar? What isn't Lodestar? Why does it exist? What are we trying to do? How do you use Lodestar? If you're a member of Lodestar, why would you be a member of Lodestar, and what do you get out of it, and what do you do with it? And then, of course, what are the limits of the powers and responsibilities of Lodestar? And what are your responsibilities actually as a group? You want to have that in there too. You want to have some sense of the actual member group's responsibilities. They've done a decent job of getting all that down. They've got to trim some of the fat, like the specialists thing. Good idea, but I don't think it belongs in your constitution. Decision making, I think this is probably your system here is probably okay, right? Your super majorities here, all this, all right. As long as it's well defined, I can see that. I can see it. At least you got the percentages right there you can refer to. So at least you've got a written document that you can refer back to and you can think with this decision making. It's a little more complicated than I would like. I would definitely want you to trim some of the fat on this. Member count override. I don't like that. I don't like the complication here. But I don't really immediately see how to simplify it either. So I don't know what to do with that. Anyway. These words on unity. All right, fine. That's good. You want the groups to be friendly with each other and be communicating with each other. Good. That's right there in the Constitution. I don't know if that actually belongs in the Constitution. That maybe should just be a bylaw. It should be a directive. Take the word prime out of directives. Directive is fine. You can't have more than one prime directive. I'm sorry. Just definitively, just in the words itself, having more than one prime directive, no. Sorry. Doesn't work. I would change the word archon to something else. Unless you really, really love the word archon. Maybe arbiter. Arbiter might work better there. I don't know. No, that's got more of a judicial kind of sense to it. Oh, and here's one more thing. They define archons, right? Highest level decision making. The Archons are representatives of the largest Lodestar factions. Okay, so only the largest Lodestar factions get to have Archons, but who defines exactly what that means? If you apply to have Archon status in Lodestar, on what basis exactly can they reject that application? We don't have any discussion as to numbers, right? If we look back up here at the member counts, right? You got 300 collective members. You got 400 Darkstar Empyrion members. Nobody else comes close to those numbers. Nobody else is above 100 even. So, obviously, these two groups are the only groups that are going to have Archons right now. So let's say Aegis Dynamics or Asajj Fleetworks gets up to like 70 members and they apply to have Archon status because they're the third biggest group in here, right? On what basis would you reject that application? What's the number count that you really want to? They said something about percentages down here, but I don't know if that makes sense. Maybe it does. Maybe they've got their own internal logic that makes sense, but I don't quite see it in this document. So, I would say my final word on the Lodestar at this point is A, there are some things that need to be better defined. B, if you're gonna have directives or lawmaking going on, you need to do a very complete and very comprehensive job of that. You need to define your terms very, very well, or else you will absolutely be subject to all kinds of inciting by groups that want to tear you apart. You know, if bad actors get into this thing and start really creating a ruckus or you know, forming a caucus against you or something like that, you need to very, very precisely define your bylaws and rules and your conduct and things like that. Next, I would say you can take a little more control over the behavior of the groups under you, and you should definitely have a very, very clear overarching purpose to the whole group. As it is, it says Lodestar is a supranational union that pursues the technological, economic, and militaristic might of all its members. Right? So they want to empower their members. Right? Why would you be part of Lodestar? Because Lodestar wants to empower you. Lodestar strives to be the paragon in all aspects of design and management. Design and management? I don't know. All aspects of gameplay, maybe? Management? Yeah. I don't know. This sentence could definitely be improved. It is a beacon of prosperity in a galaxy plagued by inexperience and turmoil. Okay, fine. So, in other words, Lodestar, the purpose of Lodestar is to be competent, prosperous, and just good, like and mighty and strong. They want to be strong. Yes, Lodestar is very strong group. Is great union of great strongness. Right? Good. All right. And I think you could simplify this entire paragraph down to something that communicates the purpose and spirit of Lodestar. I think a little bit better. However, I can decode it and kind of get what you're going for. I think I just said it there. And you know what? I'm gonna say that with these things in mind, I would say that Lodestar is probably better than any of the other supergroups. You know, the Galactic Security Council, the United Defense Initiative, any of these others, the Republic, I have not seen any other group quite so well defined and well put together. Since Archons are, you know, Archonship is only granted to those largest groups, you don't have that same UN kind of problem where it's one group, one vote, which is good. One group, one vote means that, you know, a group of like 5 members has got the same voting capacity of a group of 500. That doesn't make any sense, right? And the Archons have very tight control over who they let be Archons, which means you're placing a lot of trust into those Archons. So if you know the leaders of Collective and Darkstar Empyrion, and, you know, if you really, really trust Archduke to do you good, then fine, that'll work for you. But you gotta really trust those leaders, man, because they can screw you. They can really, really screw you. All right, so that is my review on Lodestar. I think Lodestar is okay. I think it's okay. Needs improvement, but they're going in the right direction. That is my review. All right. Thank you much for listening to all of that rambling. I hope I actually helped somebody with this. Yeah. And good night. End of video.